And I'll go on mute for once.
Welcome. My name is Jenna Copeland. I'm the academic program manager for the MS in Research Administration and Compliance. And I'm glad that everyone has showed up this evening. We have a great event for you. We're very thankful to Shannon Gallo from Career Services at SPS, as well as to our own faculty person, Jim Casey, who's going to, between the two of them, are going to talk to you about interviewing and salary negotiation today. So I'm going to hand it off to Shannon.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much, Jenna and Samantha from the Research and Administration and Compliance program. I'm thrilled to spend the evening talking with this group about interviewing and salary negotiations. And certainly thank you to my co-presenter this evening, James Casey. Next slide. So here's a little overview of what we'll be discussing this evening. First is our introduction here and reminders. As you likely have noticed, we are recording this session this evening so that we'll be able to share the link to that recording along with slides and resources with all of you. We will have a small group discussion in breakout rooms toward the end of our presentation, and that part of it will not be recorded. If you are interested in accessing the auto captioning feature, that is available to all of you as well. We'll start off with a quick overview of career services. That'll be the shameless plug part of our evening. Then I'll talk a little bit about interviewing and a little about non-interview scenarios and how you can sort of move ahead in situations that are related to salary negotiation, but not in the interview setting. Then things will be turned over to my co-presenter, James, and he'll talk really more in depth about salary and negotiation and really give some specifics for those of you who are joining us who are part of the research, administration, and compliance field. Then we'll wrap up with a brief breakout room discussion session, and we'll cover some questions toward the end. So thank you all for joining us. Next slide. As we said, I'm Shannon Gallo, Manager of Career Services here at CUNY School of Professional Studies. I have been with SPS for about 14 years. But I was thinking about it. I think this is one of the first times that I've had the wonderful opportunity to work really directly with someone from your particular master's program. So I'm excited to have this opportunity this evening. So I'll start off and just give you a very, very quick overview of the services offered by my office here at CUNY SPS. We were talking before the webinar that, some of these things are not necessarily offered. They haven't always been offered, and they aren't, something that is taken advantage of by enough students and alumni. So I encourage all of you to do so. We have a system that we use in our office called CareerLink, and we really encourage anyone interested in engaging with us. That's myself, and I have a career advisor and a data coordinator, that we encourage you to use CareerLink to schedule career counseling sessions, to certainly view job and internship postings, to take a look at career-related resources in our document library, to sign up for events and find out about career events, and much more. And that's really where we want everyone to go if they're interested in engaging with our office. Next slide, please. I also wanted to take a quick moment and mention something that we offer every semester from our team, professional development events. And in the past couple of years and continuing, we have pretty much offered all of our programs virtually. We found that that works best for the type of student body that SPS has. Most of our students are, like many of yourselves, working while attending classes, and we found that we can reach the most people effectively by doing virtual programs. Examples of those types of programs: resumes, interviewing programs. We typically will have job search strategy or career change types of webinars, things like that. Next slide, please. We also have, once every year, we offer virtual mock interviews. And this particular semester, this information on your screen, we offer our webinars at 2 different times. We have one coming up actually tomorrow evening from 6 to 7, and then again in March from 12:30 to 1:30. We're also offering a general interviewing preparation webinar. We have one from 6 to 7 on March 6th, and another during the lunch hour on April 4th. Next slide. Lastly, our office is really excited to offer some sort of interesting programs this semester. We are hosting what we're calling online career meetups. We've broken those up into industry. The first one on March 12th is healthcare, the second, business and tech, and the third, psychology, sociology, and human relations. And I'll just go ahead and add that that's sort of the catch-all for any of the more liberal studies types of programs. But at these particular events, we will have a handful of employer representatives attending a Zoom session explaining what types of career opportunities they have in their organizations. And then we'll go into breakout rooms whereby students and alumni job seekers will be able to talk directly with those employer representatives. So I encourage you that no matter what field you're interested in, any student is welcome to attend any or all of these career meetups. So I encourage any of you, if you are interested in making a career change or looking around or even just curious to see what this might be like, I encourage you to join us. Next slide, please. So now I'll move into my brief interviewing tips section for this evening's presentation. Certainly there can be, and there are, full webinars based on interviewing, but I just chose a couple of things that I thought might get everybody sort of thinking about interviewing and get everyone keeping in mind what the types of things are that are happening, you know, most frequently now. And that certainly is virtual interviewing. In some ways, it seems like, you know, virtual interviewing is kind of a sign of the times, and everybody should be familiar with things like Zoom and GoToMeeting and other types of programs, but it just goes to show you that you should always plan ahead and do your testing. Before our presentation this evening, I had a big technical difficulty and my computer updated automatically, and I thought, what am I going to do? So I logged in on my phone just in case I wasn't able to reconnect on my computer, and it just goes to show that you never know what can happen. So that's one of the suggestions that I always say is have a backup plan. If something goes wrong, figure out is there a way you could call the person you're interviewing with, or can you use a phone or a tablet if you have any problems connecting for your virtual interview. It's certainly important, I mentioned attire for hire, that even when you're on a virtual interview, it's important to dress the part. So you want to make sure that even if you, might be wearing pajama pants on the bottom, if you're shown from sort of the chest up, that you have appropriate attire on, that you have minimal distractions in your background, that the audio is clear. All of those kinds of things can make a difference. When you're interviewing, you want to make sure that you're remembered for your skill sets and your competencies and the way you qualify for the job rather than distractions or what you're wearing. I typically suggest that since it is a virtual interview, it's easy enough to have your resume in front of you on the screen. And that's an advantage to a virtual interview that is not necessarily the case if you are in person for interviews. It's also important to use your nonverbal cues. So nodding your head, agreeing, smiling, those types of things can be very effective in a virtual interview. But at times, you want to make sure that you have a good handle on those nonverbal cues. I tend to be a person who talks with my hands a lot. So if you can see, I have my hands in my lap and I'm trying to keep them there so that I don't distract by using my hands when I'm speaking. Lastly, virtual interviews, much like any in-person interview or phone interview, do require a follow-up. A general rule of thumb is the length of the interview and how in-depth the interview is kind of indicates how lengthy and in-depth your follow-up thank you message should be. I also will mention, and I put this on the bottom of the list, recorded interviews. This is something that comes up from time to time as well. An organization might say to you, please record yourself answering these 5 questions. And pretty much whenever that occurs, I typically suggest doing a little bit of research and going on YouTube and finding out who else has used that particular recorded interviewing software and find out what kinds of challenges they've experienced. And then from there, go through and do your recorded interview. The other suggestion that I have is follow the same pointers that I've described for the live virtual interview that you will use in your recorded interviews. That's something that comes up. I'm hearing more and more from job seekers that those recorded interviews are sort of taking the place of what might have previously been that phone screen. So I think it's important to sort of be prepared for that coming up in your job search as well. Next slide. I also thought it would be important to mention some nuances with interviewing with a group or a panel or a search committee. This is something that's relatively common in industries such as healthcare, education, nonprofit organizations, governmental organizations, those kinds of things. And from what I understand and what I read, that those are common industries for people and folks in your field. So that's why I thought it would be a good idea to go over this. Group interviews and committee interviews can be very nerve-wracking and very stressful, but they are certainly beneficial to candidates because it's an opportunity for all of the individuals who are making the decision to get the same sample of you and what qualifications you have. And that way, if they're talking with a couple different candidates, sometimes it's easier for them to remember you for those great qualifications that you have, rather than getting confused about which candidate said which thing. Sometimes if 2 or 3 people or even more hear a response, it will stick with them a little bit better than if you're just meeting with one person. They're also very useful for organizations, as I had mentioned, the types of organizations that might typically use a search committee. They may have a very regimented and strict interviewing process, and they have certain questions that they have to ask every single candidate certain ways. And it's a good way for the organization to make sure that they are following those types of things and that the interview process is fair and they're conducting it in an equitable way with all candidates. Preparation for these types of interviews is very similar to any kind of interview. However, I do suggest that if at all possible, get the names and titles of every person you'll be meeting so that you can go on LinkedIn and look up all of those people and have an idea of who might be the biggest decision maker, who might be the lead person in the organization or team. These things can be very useful for when you get in the room and you're working the room. If a person comes from the budgeting or finance team, they may be most keyed up on your ability to think about cost savings. If someone is from the creative or marketing team, they may be more interested in solutions and ideas that you've come up with in your current opportunity, in your current position. Follow-up is also very important for these kinds of interviews. I typically suggest that if it is a committee interview, it's probably late in the interview process. So if at all possible, find a way to address each person that you've met with during that interview. If it's not possible, you can certainly send a message to the person who seemed to be the chair or the lead of the committee and mention how much you enjoyed speaking with their colleagues at that time. Finally, I thought I would mention a couple of other things that might come up if you're at the stage of a group or panel or committee interview. This is where you might be asked to do a simulation or make a presentation. Perhaps if the position would require you to prepare reports and present that information to teams, they may ask you to do that very thing in the interview. And I think that just like committee interviews can be beneficial to candidates, I think that this can be very beneficial to you as well. I think that interviews are so nerve-wracking that when you get an opportunity to actually show them what you can do, that really works in your favor because they'll be thinking more about the effectiveness and what you were presenting to them as opposed to if you were nervous in the interview. Next slide. Okay, so this is just a handful of do's and don'ts. And this is kind of, some of these things may seem obvious, but I always think that these are some of the most important things to reiterate when I'm talking about interviewing, sort of in a general sense. One of the most important things, and this is something that I hear from hiring managers and recruiters all the time, that if you're not asking them questions, they have a harder time taking you seriously as a candidate. So make sure that you're thinking about questions you will ask them ahead of time. And this is really an opportunity because, as I say later, a job interview is really just as much your decision as it is theirs. So when they say at the end of the interview, what questions do you have for me? This is your chance to really show them that you're a serious job seeker, you've thought about this job ahead of time, you have some ideas about the organization, and you also it's important to you to make a good decision about your career. Sometimes I think it can be difficult because you might prepare questions that they actually answer during the course of the interview. So 2 pointers that I have for questions at the end of the interview. One of them that may not be likely to come up is ask the person what they like best about that organization or their job or that industry even. And this can really help you because if they have a hard time coming up with something that they like about their work, that could be a bit of a red flag for you. Another question that's good to ask that they may not necessarily tell you about ahead of time is, why is there a position opening? Did someone get promoted? Did someone resign? Did they create a new position? Did they finally get some budget for an opportunity? Those kinds of things can tell you a lot about the organization, how important this particular role will be in that team. And also, if they stumble over the answer, you again might have on, and you want to make sure that you understand clearly what you're getting into. Another do is to be forthcoming and authentic. And when I say forthcoming, I'm talking about, especially if you're interviewing and it's, the position is a big jump for you and your career. And they seem to have questions for you about, are you qualified for this? Why should we hire you for this over someone who has more experience? And this is where you want to be forthcoming and explain to them the things that you've done to make sure that you're developing strong competencies and that you've been upskilling, that you pursued a degree in the field, all of those things. And I think it's important, once again, to be authentic and honest and explain, my strengths are in this and this, I still have a little bit more to learn in this and this, but I'm willing to learn and I'm eager to learn. And I think that that's sometimes the most important thing when you're interviewing for positions. It goes without saying, do your homework on the job, the organization, and the people. I mentioned previously going on LinkedIn. That can be an extremely useful resource, not just for networking, but for getting intel and finding out about people and organizations and jobs. As I mentioned before, don't be timid, be forthcoming. If you are at the end of the interview, tell them. If you've decided truly through the course of the interview that you really do want the job, don't be afraid to tell them that you want the job. But note, I said want the job, not need the job. I think you'll hear more about that later whenever my colleague speaks. And finally, as I said before, don't forget, this is just as much an interview of the organization as it is of you. So approach it as a two-way street. Next slide. Okay, so now we're moving into some of those situations that I described that are not related to an actual interview, but I think are still relevant to a conversation about salary and compensation. Next slide. So this is a big one, asking for a raise or a promotion. And this is something that does come up. As I mentioned before, I've been at SPS for a long, long time. And even with our students who are in bachelor's degree programs, they come to school, they pursue their degrees. And one of the reasons that many of our students do that is because they want to further their income potential or grow in their career. So I thought I would discuss a little bit about asking for a raise or a promotion in the workplace. If possible, prepare in advance and provide notice. So what I'm referring to here is, if it's not necessarily going to be part of a performance review conversation, but you've got an idea that it's time to ask for a raise. Maybe you're hearing about the company has really had a lot of success lately, and you're thinking it's a good time to ask for more money. Check with that person and say, hey, I'd like to have a conversation about compensation, about my role in the organization, my interest in growing my position, and let them know that that is what the conversation will be about so that they can think about it and prepare as well. Sometimes that can be difficult, and that's where I say timing is critical. Sometimes, particularly in industries that are not corporate profit-based settings, timing can be very, very critical. I know certainly within education, higher education, for example, a lot of times the budgets are very much set. It may be a union organization. It may be a time of low enrollment, for example, and there really truly will not be budget for a raise. But maybe there's an opportunity for a title change and an indication that when things do look better with the budget, you will continue to contribute in the way that you have. And at that time, you'll have a conversation again. And I always like to mention that because I think timing is very, very critical for anything related to compensation. I also think that time of year can make a difference. So that's important as well. Understand where your company, when do they make their budgets for the following year? When do they look at surplus? When do they decide about bonuses? Those kinds of things are important to understand. Before you have this conversation, make an impact list, and that's what I'll call it. It's basically you're quantifying the impact that you're making in the organization. Did you chair a committee that rolled out a new product? Did you come up with a new process to do something that was more efficient? Did you find a way to save your company money? Did you find a way to make more money? Those kinds of things. Did you identify a significant problem that your organization could solve? Think about if you're working in a not-for-profit organization or a not a profit-based organization, how did you contribute in a big way to the organization's mission? These kinds of things make a big difference when you're asking for a raise or asking for a new title. The performance review time can be very useful for these conversations. It also can be very useful to look back at your most recent performance review and see all the wonderful things your supervisor said about you, and then talk about those things when you have the conversation. Finally, an important part of this is focus on how it benefits the organization. If you make your boss look, if you look good, your boss looks good. So think about how you've made a difference on the organization, whether it's the bottom line, as I said before, contributing to the mission in a huge way. Those kinds of things make a difference. It's important to think about it that way rather than how much you need a raise or how much you deserve a raise. The conversation should be more focused on how you have benefited them. And when I was reading through and doing research for this, I watched a video and the person talked about, if you're asking for a raise of $10,000, be able to quantify how your work will do $10,000 worth or more when you're asking for that increase. Finally, I wanted to mention that sometimes these types of things can be discussed informally, even if not necessarily formally. It might be maybe you're out to lunch with your supervisors, or there is a leadership training program and you have an opportunity to have coffee with somebody from the budget office. You sometimes can be thinking about it and can sort of discuss it informally so that when the conversation comes up later in a more formal manner, it won't be a complete surprise. Finally, I'll mention that you should be thoughtful about who you're talking with. Are you speaking with your direct manager? Are you talking with somebody in the C-suite, in the top leadership level, who will have an opportunity to really ultimately make that decision? Or maybe it's a conversation with human resources to get some intel and find out what kinds of budgets are available or what their headcount looks like and those kinds of things before you ask and before you have the conversation. Next slide. Okay, lastly, making an internal shift. And this is pretty quick. Some of the most important things about doing this kind of internal shift in your organization. And I mention this because many students at SPS like to make career changes. And sometimes an easy way to do that is to stay within an organization where you have been working, but shift into a different function or a different area of that organization in order to eventually move into the new career in a different organization. It's kind of like taking baby steps to get to your ultimate goal. But this is where networking with colleagues can really come in. You can find out about what other people are doing and how other people who are in those positions have gotten to where they are. Another tip for making an internal change for your career is to see where you can contribute in those areas. If you've come to pursue your degree and you're learning a whole bunch more about certain things, and maybe your organization has an opening in another area, they aren't necessarily ready to hire for that role, but see if you can offer to help out on projects. That way it gives that team manager and others in the organization an opportunity to see how you can make an impact. So when they do decide they're ready to hire for that position, you might be better positioned to be able to slide into the job. Finally, I'll mention that I do suggest, if possible, to be forthcoming with your manager. Many times in organizations, I think it's difficult because people feel uncomfortable about making a shift when they are perfectly happy and fine in their current position. And it can be difficult because you don't want to rock the boat with your manager if it doesn't work out. But at the same time, you want to maintain that relationship because you may likely be working in the same organization. So a general rule of thumb, and this was suggested to me years and years ago by someone I was networking and a person who was mentoring me, and they suggested that if you get to the point in the process where you would think your manager would give you a heads up, then you should consider giving them a heads up. you know, hey, I had an internal interview for this role over in this other department. I think I'm pretty close to getting the position. I just wanted to let you know. I hope that you'll support me. And those kinds of things I think can go a long way, because if you move on to a different area at the organization and you're successful, again, that makes your former boss look really good. So that's sort of how I'll close my discussion about making an internal shift. And I'll go ahead and move ahead to the next section.
Jim, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and go forward?
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. I was waiting for the next slide. It's great to be here tonight to speak to you on interviewing tips, salary negotiation, and the importance of all of this. I know you're an hour later than me. I'm in San Antonio, Texas, where we got up to a balmy 77 degrees today. So I feel you're cold in New York City. But you know, this is, you know, Shannon did a great job of just laying the table out for all of these issues, and listening to her go through some of these bullet points brought back other memories of experiences in my career. We don't have enough time, you know, to go through all that today, obviously. But what I do want to leave you with is a lot of information that upskills your skills, and it's important to recognize that you become a better interviewer. Even if you don't get the job, you will be better at your present job. So while not getting a particular job is a disappointment in many cases, it does help build your skill level for the future. So on the topic of compensation, what you'll see on this slide, and I know Shannon mentioned it, is that in research administration, networking is critical. All of you have heard me say that in RAC 600, and that networking goes in a variety of ways, including, you know, getting conversations with your colleagues of what kind of job, you know, what does your university, you know, pay for a pre-award administrator 3, or what does your university pay for an assistant or an associate or a director. So this is where a lot of that, certainly at the public universities, more of that stuff is public. But once you go into private universities and nonprofits, some of that information is a little more opaque and very hard to get. So this is why networking is key. I know you've heard me talk in RAC 600 about being a member of a professional organization like NCURA or SRA. At the present time, NCURA is the only one that has salary data on positions, and that is available behind the firewall, which means you do need to be a member of NCURA. But it is very useful information from 2020, and you can easily update that with a couple percent inflationary increase every year since that year. SRA, and I verified this with them, SRA does not have any salary survey data at the present time. So, you know, you're really going to be looking at places like Glassdoor, NCURA, your internal networking with your colleagues. And on the topic of being a member of a professional association, you know, hopefully your institutions will pay for that. Let's say NCURA, you know, and if they can't, for whatever budget reason there is, I would urge you to seriously think about putting the money out of your own pocket to be a member, because there are so many benefits to being a member that are behind the firewall. that you will not get otherwise. So keep that in mind for the future. And I will say that, there's a lot of data out there on, for instance, Glassdoor, and other job sites where you can get a good idea of reviews of organizations and what they're paying in specific job titles. And so there is a lot of information out there. Sometimes you have to do a little more digging. And I'll tell you what, compared to when I started in the field, all of that was hard copy. It was before the internet, and I'm not ashamed to mention that. It was all in books, or you relied on what the universities were telling you. That there was no what you call transparency in any of that, back in the day. So that, and I think it goes to another point that Shannon was talking about that I want to reemphasize is the importance of doing your research and doing your preparation. So it's yes, it's the salary levels, but it's all and the job duties, but do your homework, and that will give you much better confidence as you move forward in the interview and then to a salary negotiation. Here you're going to see some of the, I guess I'd call in-depth ideas to think about as you're moving forward in these areas. Some of this I know I mentioned in class in RAC 600 over the last 5+ years, but this is good to reemphasize now for everybody, since all the attendees on this webinar are either current students, former students, I suppose, and alumni. You'll see here in the bullet points, it goes back to the idea of doing your homework and putting your information together. I never thought about it. I was a lawyer before I became a research administrator. And I never thought about it for many years that this would be, an interview and would be like stating your case. And I think maybe if I would have approached some of that more in a lawyer's sort of way, in putting together why I should get a particular job, that may have been a good thing to do. But really, you need to put the information together. And Shannon said an excellent point is, if you want the job, tell them. I've done that, especially in the last 10 to 15 years. I'm not shy anymore. I probably was more shy earlier in my career, but certainly now I'll tell them, I'm your person, or I'm your man, whatever you want to say, right? And so there is a way to build your confidence in the field without being too cocky. And so keep that in mind. Over the last 10 or 12 years, as you know from CUNY, but with other programs, there have been an explosion of certificates and master's degrees in research administration. And I can tell you that, in my career managing offices and hiring many people, that many of our job descriptions now would say, a bachelor's degree is required, but a bachelor's plus a certificate or plus a master's is preferred. Now, in HR terminology, what is required versus what is preferred. And that's why I think a lot of you are in this program, or have been in the program, because you want to be in that preferred category, because you're all awesome research administrators. And keep that in mind. And, I never got a certification because I had too much education. And I didn't get the CRA, but, I went to law school. And as far as I'm concerned, that was the only hard test I was going to take. But I would, encourage you, since we are, and I've said it many times, research administration is a lifelong knowledge acquisition. It doesn't matter if you've been in the field 2 years or 15 or 30, we're all learning new things. And, you know, the best VPs or AVPs I work for are the ones that can also admit that they don't know it all either. And I think if everybody had more of that attitude, I think certain conflicts in offices, in research at least, would be minimal. So it's not going away. And you know, the quicker you realize that, you know, this is building, as I was telling Jenna before we got warmed up here, build your brand. What is your research administration brand? And I'm talking about a brand for you individually as a research administrator. It's not the brand that your current university has bestowed upon you. You should think really deep down, why am I doing it? What makes me better than almost anybody else in the field? And where do I want to go? And so in a way, it does take a lot of soul searching to take that journey. Certainly, you know, many of the students or alumni on this webinar today are getting the full master's, or they're getting the certificate, but the master's has increased in importance because more universities are looking for them, at least in the preferred category for jobs. And I would always, I have 2 master's degrees, so I don't have to sit and worry about it. But I would say get a master's degree if any way you can in this program. And that's the best investment you can make. I know it costs money, and it goes to issues of whether your institution or nonprofit will pay for it. But certainly in the long run, the only trend I see is that more knowledge acquisition, you know, as exemplified by a certificate or a master's degree, will be required. That stuff is not going away. So next slide, please. Okay, good. This builds on, you know, some ideas that Shannon dovetailed in her comments. A lot of this comes from my experience in the trenches in research administration. And part of what I, you know, in terms of my journey in the field, what I'm trying to do today is help you avoid some of the potholes and the frustrations that all of us have gone through, the older generation, shall we say. So this is the point of education, is to make sure you're armed with more knowledge, that it gets easier for you. So keep all this in the context of those thoughts. If you get an offer at the end of the process, you know, some institutions will put pressure on you to, you know, agree or not, you know, overnight. And I've always asked for a couple of days to consider an offer. Obviously, I'm a good lawyer. I want it in writing. I want all the details. Certainly, but besides salary, if the move is a distance, you know, 150, 100, 200, 300 or more miles, you should ask if they will pay any relocation expenses. So you need to think about asking for that. You need to ask about, and this probably came out during the interview process, what kind of support professionally can they give you? Okay, giving you, you know, yearly membership at NCURA or SRA, that's a minimum thing. Now, believe it or not, some schools can't even afford that, unfortunately. But, you know, hopefully you are interviewing at an institution that believes in human capital, that believes in increasing human capital, and a certain amount of it will require paid memberships or conference attendance. You know, I know I mentioned in RAC 600, but there are many no cost training opportunities on the internet, on the Ancura YouTube channel. I've done some of those videos, these little 4-minute, I call them contemporaneous, sharing of knowledge. But although there's a lot of virtual opportunities now, hopefully you can get them to pay for you to at least go to a regional meeting or the annual meeting. And in the bigger offices, it's a little harder because you may have 15 or 20 people that want to go, and that is a lot of money at that point. But that's for the director AVPs to hash out. But you should bring up during the interview, and if they're going to pay for some of this professional development opportunity, it should go in the offer letter too. So don't be shy about asking them to slightly change the offer letter, so that all these bullet point items are in it. Certainly during the interview process, you want to be respectful and fact-based. That goes back to the idea of what I'm talking about today, of being prepared. Interviews are a very stressful circumstance. I was going to just briefly mention that some years back, I had to do a major reorg at a university where I had to lay off 36 people. They all got 60 days notice. Then in that 60 days, I had to convene about 72 search committee interviews, of which I was the chair of. So I had to chair 70 some interviews to refill the positions I just laid off. And of course, everybody is what can I say, freaking out during that 60-day period, because they don't know if their job, if they're coming back to the institution. Roughly 90% of them did, but probably 6 of them didn't. But I chaired those search committee interviews, and it was so, and I wasn't the only one. I think I probably had eight people along with me, and then the candidate. And these were all internal candidates, either had worked in research or were actually would want transfers from another part of the university. And but every interview, and it was once you got over the original feeling being nervous, I think most of them went very well. We were looking, from my standpoint as the chair, since I was the AVP, I wanted to make sure we got the best people into these positions. One thing from that experience, I will tell you that it's important to have your 5-minute elevator speech. You probably have heard that. I've been asked it in elevators by strangers, at professional meetings, and they'll be like, tell me about yourself in 5 minutes. Boom, I can do it. But I have the experience doing that sort of thing. So you want to practice with a trusted advisor, with someone from your family, someone in the field that can't have any control over you, and think about that 5-minute presentation. I know with all those interviews I told you about just now, every one of them started out with me saying to the person at the other end of the table, tell us what you're all about. Well, and why do you want this position? Those are the two things. So always have that in top of mind. But even at the big schools, search committees, at the entry to mid-level non-management, they're probably still the exception rather than the rule. But the university I worked at, I think that was some sort of a record in the Ancura universe of chairing, 70 some job interviews in under 2 months. That was a lot of work. And one thing I will point out, because it's an HR issue, when we did those, we had to ask the same question to everyone. We didn't veer off script because HR, gave me instructions that I was to only ask what was approved. Some of this was politically sensitive, so we didn't want any litigation out of it. And so that's how we did it. And then at the end of every interview, everybody on the committee filled out their form with their responses, but every question was the same. And that, if you're ever in that situation, that's probably because HR at that institution is requiring it. And I'm fine with it. It worked out very well. Don't interrupt people when you are in an interview one-on-one or in the group. I think how can I say this? It's important to have a good professional image. Even down to the stuff of sitting up straight, making direct eye contact. If you're shaking everybody's hand at the beginning or the end of, let's say, a committee interview, give them all a good handshake. It's just, I call it all old school stuff, but it really is, I consider these sort of classic steps that people will, that they should take. Don't be afraid to walk away if there is no longer a fit. Sometimes you will realize there is no fit at the end of the first interview. I had a case where I knew within 10 minutes that the job was not a fit because I practically got into an argument with the VP because he was well, anyway, you get the idea. This is part of what life will illustrate to you as you go forward. But at any rate, don't be afraid, to say, hey, this is not going to work, and move on. Don't tell them you need a job. I mean, that is don't even give a whiff of desperation. I'm laughing because I can think of cases in the past where I've actually heard this from candidates talking to me, and then I'm like, well, then how desperate are you, and how much of what you're telling me is true or not, and what's going on at your current employer. There isn't a bullet point for the next point, but I do want to say that if you have a gap in your resume, which is generally maybe more than a month, whether that's a voluntary separation, whether you were fired, whatever the circumstance, or you left the workforce because you gave birth to your son or daughter and you raised them for 2 or 3 years. If there's any gap for whatever reason, make sure you have a good short answer to give the committee, because they will, I've been on both ends. I've been leading them, I've been a candidate, and if there is a gap, I know someone's going to pick a question at me about it, like, what's this 2-month gap? It's like, well, this, that, and the other thing, or, whatever the case is. Think about it if that is your situation in your career. The last point on this slide is don't be weak. By that, I mean, be confident. Okay. I want all of you to be confident in knowing who you are, what your brand is, what you're good at. I want you to be confident in you telling the hiring manager or the search committee at a possible new institution, this is what I stand for, this is what I'm good at, this is what I need work at. And face it, we all need to improve. It does, like I said, it doesn't matter if you've been in as long as me or you've been around for 2 years. There's always things we can work on. Anybody tells you that they know it all, I steer clear of people like that if I can help it. So when I say don't be weak, that means thinking in terms of building your own confidence and how you can make your way through this profession we call research administration. When I say weak, I'm generally talking about maybe answers that are not as sharp as they could be or as confident as they could be. Maybe it sounds a little old school to say wishy-washy, but that is the sort of stuff you will hear once you start interviewing and hiring people in your own careers. You're going to see this stuff. So I'm trying to say, you know your worth, know the salary ranges, and one other point before I forget it. Try and do some work on peer institutions to the one you currently work at. Okay, big public to big public, big private to big private, medium public to medium private. You want to do this goes to your reconnaissance of what positions are being paid. And the reality is if you are working at a PUI that does $3 million a year in grants, that's an entirely different world than working at MIT. The people at MIT will be paid more, not only because it's a higher cost of living area, but they got more work to do, and the stress levels will be much higher. So there are certain, and I know I've told this to students offline when they've asked me about this stuff, but part of it's a quality of life issue. Do you want to go from a big university to a smaller school, which is what I did? After I left Northwestern, I went to Bradley University. So I'm going from 200 million down to 5 million. It's a whole different world. And the culture is different. And it's, Bradley's a master's degree university, not a doctoral heavy research university. So, and I know there's a couple people on this webinar that have asked me about this in the past. And I said, for me, it was always, to move up, you have to move on, which means if you think you're going to go from a mid-level pre-award person to AVP for research at a fairly big university within 15 years, that's going to be, that's very hard to do. I went small for my first directorship because it was a director's position. And at a smaller school, you do a lot more different things, and I did, than I would had I stayed at Northwestern, which is a great school, great memories of working there. But there's different environments, and this goes to what is important to you over the length of your career. So this is all for me to say, to build your confidence in being the best you can be. Build your confidence that you're thoughtful research administrators. As I've told my classes the last few semesters, I don't want you to be bureaucrats. I don't want you just to be the checklist paper pusher. This is getting you to think beyond just the four corners of your job description and thinking, what can I do to get to the next level? So next slide.
Jim, before we move to the next slide, you asked me to remind you to talk about resilience.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'll make this quick. We're at 6 o'clock my time, 7 o'clock in New York City. In my experience in the trenches on both sides of the interview table, it's very important to build resilience in how you handle the inevitable, maybe slight disappointment. So resilience is really part of the broader idea of building confidence in yourself and in your career trajectory. I think resilience is so important, because if you know what your worth is, and very few people go through their lives professionally without hitting some roadblock or being challenged in some way. And as you probably read in many articles, how you respond to such situations says a lot about your character than what the situation was. How you bounce back is key. And that is very true in research administration. And I think if you keep your eye on the ball of where you want to go in your career, the resilience will come. And, like I'll say at the end of this webinar, if any of you want to email me offline afterward, I'm always happy to take follow-up questions from any of you, even if you're not in my current class. Thank you, Jenna.
Okay, so thank you all so far. I hope you've been sort of absorbing all of the things that we've been talking about, and it's got everybody thinking about their own experiences and so forth. So at this point, we're going to place everyone into breakout rooms. We are suggesting that you use this as an opportunity to talk amongst yourselves, share your stories and your experiences as they relate to salary, job searching, interviewing, negotiation, these things. Talk about your previous successes. If you've been, asked for a pay increase or gotten a promotion or made a shift, how you were successful. Practice your pitch. As James had mentioned, it's important to have that pitch prepared. You never know when you'll need it. So talk about those kinds of things. Practice negotiating and discussing with one another these kinds of things. And come up with your own do's and don'ts, if nothing else. I'm going to go ahead and place you in the room. We decided, I think we're going to do 8 or 10 minutes. Is that correct? And then we'll all come back together and do a little share back of the discussions. And then I think James is going to take the rest of the time to answer questions.
And can we remind people that the breakouts and the Q&A will not be recorded, so folks can feel more comfortable asking questions they may have.
Yep, great point. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and put everybody in the breakout room.